the most underrated players, guys that we put first round caliber grades, or we say, hey, we don't care if these guys get picked in the first round. They're fringe first rounders at worst for us, but they're not necessarily getting a ton of first round.
So the biggest thing here was they tested out athletic. They're not unathletic. These guys are all plus athletes. Some are elite athletes. They all graded out extremely well, whether it was in 1 year or over the course of their careers. They have very good grades and aren't necessarily being thought of as great prospects. We are much higher on them than it seems like the general public or where they're going to get drafted is. And that was the conceit.
And it's important to connect to the athleticism component, right? Because even if we don't weigh it maybe as heavy as the grading component, there are certainly guys where if they don't have the athleticism, the grade, the value of the grade diminishes a little bit. When you have both, when you have especially multiple years of good production, and then a guy tests well, usually those things mesh really well.
Yes, that's the thing. We feel very good about these guys because of those two items are present: on-field production and athleticism. That, in our books, is a good combo.
So the full article's over at ProFootballFocus.com. Let's start with J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, a guy that I do think we are higher on than most. I understand why people aren't as high on him for a few of the reasons. We just think that his trump cards are enough to have value at the next
Honestly, the reason I think people aren't high on him is because the general public doesn't have access to all 22. You just don't see his routes on Stanford tape because he only plays on the outside. It's one of the biggest things. People are sour on him because every single catch, it seems like, it's because every single catch he has doesn't seem like it seems like it's contested. It seems like he's not getting open. That was the route tree at Stanford. Right. They were not on pure go routes. They did not throw him. He would beat a guy, and they would not throw like a lofted deep ball. It was always back shoulder on the go there at Stanford. So that's always going to be a contested catch. It's always going to look like you're not open, even when he has a guy by 2 steps. It would get thrown as a back shoulder. That was just that offense they were in. He was running the silo, the stereotypical straight go, straight hitch, straight comeback, straight post. That was it. Not a lot of double moves, not a lot of frills in that Stanford offense, but he did that at a really high level. And he graded out highest on 3rd and 4th downs of any receiver in the nation, highest in the red zone of any receiver in the nation. He wins where I'd like a guy to win. Very good hands, great contested catches, and then had a 4.49 40 at his pro day.
Were you surprised at that? Because I didn't see him as a speed guy necessarily. Were you surprised at that 40?
No, because there are a handful. Because if you went back and watched, there were a handful of pure goes where he got a clean release, and then corners were not making up that ground quickly. When a guy really is slow and gets a clean release, gets a step on a corner, you see that start to get made up, and a guy can recover and get back on him, and then you're like, okay, that guy's more of a 4.6 range. You saw that with Kelvin Harmon, definitely on tape. He would get a step, and then all of a sudden that corner would make that step back up. That was not the case with J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. When he got that step, usually he maintained.
All right, Chase Winovich, another guy we have listed here. We've put him in our top 32. We've put him ahead of Rashawn Gary. We always, seem to bring that comp there, but he's been the more productive Michigan edge defender, perhaps in a more favorable situation than Rashawn Gary, but it doesn't matter. And we're talking about a guy that has the burst off the edge and just wins.
Well, when I hear that criticism of, they put Winovich, Winovich was given a better opportunity to make plays and get sacks than Rashawn Gary, you're basically telling me that the Michigan coaching staff thought Winovich was a better player, is what you just told me when you say that. You say, the Michigan coaching staff knows both well, and they decided to put him in the playmaker role and not Rashawn Gary. They decided to let Rashawn Gary just mush rush, eat up blockers, that sort of thing. Why would you not? You would give your better talent the more opportunities to make plays. So anytime that criticism comes up, that one to me doesn't really hold water. The biggest criticism that holds water is he's 24 years old right now, is that he is older. Yes, it is reduced on a football field. Yes, he's been very good on a football field, but he's older at the moment. The only thing I can say to that is, one, there hasn't been a lot of guys produce as well as he had, 90-plus grades each of the past 2 seasons, and he's freakishly athletic. It's like he's already, sub 7.3 cone at 256 pounds. He is very athletic. You almost want guys to be older and more NFL ready. I don't really care too much about if a guy's great in year 4. I want to get production on my rookie deal.
I like that he can win different ways. I mean, I was not surprised, but watching him even just week 1 against Notre Dame, I'm like, I just saw him win with pad level. I saw him win with his hands. Of course, he's got the hustle plays everybody likes to talk about, but I like that he wins all different ways, and that's what shows up in the grade. When you have 2 90-plus grades back-to-back, you have to win different ways, and Winovich certainly has that. Andy Isabella, we've talked about quite a bit here. Another guy that we have is
you guys get that,
a first-round type of player. No, there are new listeners. There are new listeners. they're old listeners too, who hate us talking about Andy Isabella. But what do we love about Andy Isabella?
I love that he is incredibly athletic. Like different athleticism than basically you can be fast. He is next level fast. There's not defensive backs in the NFL that will be able to make up ground on him. We just talked about that with Arcega-Whiteside, guys who weren't able to make up ground, some college corners. There's not a cornerback in the NFL that I think is going to make up ground on him once he gets a step on you. So he has that going for him. He's small. He's short, but he's not small. He is 5'9", but he's 188 pounds, which is very solid for a 5'9" human being. He's very strong, plays through contact well in that regard. And then the thing I keep coming back to is, yes, you can talk about the catch radius being an issue. It is an issue. Not going to love him in contested catch situations, but he separates at a high level, and I'd rather take that than the issues than guys who can make contested catch at a high level but not separate. And if it really was that big of an issue, he had UMass quarterbacks throwing him the football and still led the nation receiving. If UMass quarterbacks can hit him and in stride, I think NFL quarterbacks are going to have a good chance of hitting him.
Overrated catch radius.
I'm just saying, like, yes, it is an issue, but catch radius on balls down the field, like far down the field, are basically just how fast you are. So
that's where he's got really good balls.
Yes, he's good at tracking balls down the field, and that to me is important. And there's a reason. I think there's something to the fact that UMass, terrible football program. I'm not like breaking any news here. 3 players drafted this millennium, all of a sudden gets some guy out of the blue who leads the nation in receiving, and is rumored. I think there's something special there that a guy coming from that program can be as good as he was this past season.
There are some concerns about him against press. Any concerns about?
Oh yeah, You're not drafting, so we think of him as a first rounder, but I think of him as first rounder because I think there's a lot of value in not your number 1 receiver, but your number 2 receiver can have a ton of value too in terms of what he brings to the table. He's not going to be your guy on third down like J.J. Arcega-Whiteside where run this slant and we know we're going to him. That's never going to be him. He's never going to have. He's the only way to have 100 catches in the season if he goes to New England and he has Tom Brady throwing him a bunch of balls over the middle of the field. That's really
even then, that's not really his game.
Even then, that's not super his game. I think he could develop into that. He still is very athletic. That's not his game up to this point. His game is down the field, winning down the field, getting you separation, and being deadly in terms of if you get him one-on-one running at a safety, that safety is toast.
All right.
So a creative usage with him. You're not going to stick him at your X. You're not going to stick him on one side of the field and say, hey, run the route tree. I keep going back to J.J. Arcega-Whiteside.
He's a movement guy. You're going to get him off the press. But he's also not a slot, though, either. He's not that pure, like, two-way go slot guy either. But deep over routes, crossing routes, go routes, like you're saying, he's got the speed to really put pressure on the defense. David Long from Michigan, another guy we've spoken about quite a bit here. If you have the PFF draft guide, go check out the numbers. They're spectacular. Completion percentage of about 30% into his coverage the last couple of years. That's always inflated by a couple overthrows here and there, but it gets you in the ballpark. It matches the grades pretty well. David Long, definitely a feisty man coverage corner.
Yeah, he gave up 1 catch over 10 yards all season long. 12-yard is his longest gain he gave up. 24 yards is the longest gain he gave up in his entire career at Michigan. Yes, he gets a little grabby, but and yes, he's a little undersized, and yes, he hasn't played a ton of zone coverage. He played basically either cover 2 or man there at Michigan. But you saw high-level play from him. I go back to the Maryland game in 2017 where he rolls off his assignment in man coverage, cuts underneath a corner route, and picks off a pass in the end zone. You saw that's a zone feel type of play when he could look in the backfield, had good instincts in that regard.
Marcus Peters type of play.
Yes, that type of play. So, and then from a mirror perspective, he's as good as it gets in this class. I mean, he might not want him on Julio Jones. He might get physically manhandled by some bigger receivers. That's just, how it works in the NFL. It's tough to, when you're 5'10", 195 pounds, it's just tough to match up with those guys. That's same for anyone. You might not want him in press coverage. You might want him in off coverage in that regard. But against a shorter, quicker receiver, he's just going to be able to lock them down. He just showed that at Michigan.
Just for perspective, the teams that play a ton of man coverage and like to play matchups, right? So it's not just man, stay on a side. It's actually, I have this big corner, put him on a big receiver. So the Patriots do that, and the iterations of the Patriots now, they're in Miami, they're in Detroit. Mm-hmm. Other teams will do that. We've seen Arizona do it with Patrick Peterson in the past.
Probably Tampa Bay would.
Tampa Bay will probably.
Bowls,
so now David Long is a perfect complement for, say, Carlton Davis in Tampa Bay. Patrick Peterson in Arizona, if that's what they want to do. Compliment to Darius Slay in Detroit. Compliment to Xavier Howard in Miami. Compliment to Stephon Gilmore in New England, right? So if you have the bigger, longer corner that could take on the bigger receivers, David Long's the guy that you want facing the route runner. He's got to match up with your Antonio Browns, your Julian Edelmans, your T.Y. Hiltons, right? So there's a ton of value in those types of guys, especially if you're in a man-heavy type of scheme.
Yes.
And he's got all that experience playing man. Next guy you listed here, most underrated. These are guys with first-round talent. My boy, Darnell Savage from Maryland. Speed that shows up on films, sub 4.4. Our guy Sam has compared him to Bob Sanders, the way he flies around the field. He is like the missile coming out from the secondary. I keep saying, though, I want him patrolling the short, intermediate, middle of the field.
You want him
robber role.
You're a robber. Yeah.
Yes. So does he have free safety type of skills? Yes. Like deep safety? Yes. But if you put him in that robber role, dig routes over the middle, short post, all that type of stuff, I think he just compresses passing lanes so quickly. And we've talked about he's missed a ton of tackles in the open field, but you said, you know what? He's taking good angles when he's doing that. It feels like a fixable thing. Or that's also what Earl Thomas did early in his career. And it's like, if you make enough big plays on the back end, I could deal with a few missed tackles. Not that he's Earl Thomas, but you just that's the give and take.
There's also different ways to miss tackles. If a guy literally is taking bad angles and then is completely off balance missing a tackle, that's one thing. If a guy is taking the right angle and then just refuses to break down and dives at a guy's feet and then misses, that's to me a more fixable thing. You can fix a guy breaking down. You can't fix a guy not being able to see or predict where a ball carrier is going to be. Savage was much more able to predict, took the right angle, and then just missed at that point, which, again, that was Earl Thomas at the beginning of his career. And so, to me, you're getting a player, and the thing I love about him is multiple years of good grades. We struggle with small sample sizes at safety. He's had back-to-back seasons, very good grades at safety position.
So he's kind of like a strong safety, but not a box safety that you envision, right? Like if he plays the strong safety role as far as coverage goes, which is robber, but also kind of out over the slot every now and again and everything, I think his coverage skills in those areas are just spectacular. Could he play deep safety? Sure, but he's kind of a very unique strong safety type of
11 pass breakups over the past 2 years, 7 picks over the past 2 years. Those are very good numbers.
Love it. Darnell Savage, and then 3 more guys to list here. Elkton Jenkins from Mississippi State. I had a tough time slotting him into my 3-round mock that's going to be dropped on Tuesday morning. But we're saying first-round caliber talent, even if there's... I don't know if there's a perfect fit for him in the first round.
I was going to say, I think the reason for that is he's not necessarily schematically a fit for anyone. He's just very solid all around. He's not like Bradbury very much is a zone-heavy team. So all of a sudden, you can fit him into any zone-heavy team.
Put him
that'd
with
be
the Rams,
perfect.
Falcons.
Elkton Jenkins, I just think he's a very good football player, full stop. I think he's just any scheme could use an Elkton Jenkins with how good he is in pass pro, how balanced he is in the running game. He had probably the fewest bad losses. We talk about guys, you said that earlier, the sharping thing, how the ugly reps can make you worried about a guy going to the NFL. He had so few of those on tape. When he lost, it was just, he kind of lose leverage. He'd kind of let a guy slip off, was never really completely shed terribly. He was always seemingly close enough in the right position. And so I just love his projection in the next level. That balance, to me, come back to it, the best in this class.
And then Greg Little from Ole Miss, it's an odd one, right? He was productive at tackle at Ole Miss. They run a ton of RPOs. I don't know if he's just not getting hyped because really you just don't have a ton of true NFL pass sets to evaluate him on. But when he had to do something close to the ball in that ballpark, he looked pretty good doing it.
I think the thing is he's another one in the mold of Yaldi Froholt in terms of he's just not strong.
Yeah.
When a guy's doesn't have good play strength, when he's not really moving guys, you're worried about him. He only did 15 reps on the bench at the combine, which I don't think the bench is super indicative of how strong a guy is or how strong he plays on the field. But to me, that was not surprising. He just he's not a people mover at this point. But again, he's only a 21-year-old. He's a true junior who started 3 years in the SEC. There is a lot to like on his tape. And again, he was a fairly good athlete when he tested out at the combine.
But usually 35-inch arms, and people are going crazy.
Yes, exactly.
That, right?
35-inch arms in the SEC. What he did, how he produced there, people should be going crazy, and we like him as a late type of first rounder. Again, the grades, and he has good athleticism, good size, and he's young. I mean, there's a lot to like about Greg Little. If you're at the back end of the first round, and you're thinking, all this tackle class passed me. He's still on the board. The tackle class hasn't passed you. He's still a very good.
He's in our second tier of tackles, and let's just pretend Cody Ford is a guard, and you have Jonah Williams, Andre Dillard, Jawan Taylor, Dalton Reisner off the board for some reason. Mm-hmm. By the time the Texans are picking at 23, do the Texans maybe consider Greg Little that high? I'd happily
take Greg Little that high if I'm the Texans still.
I mean, you've got Julian Davenport and his really long arms over there whiffing on blocks. You get another long arm.
I mean, him in the SEC compared to Martinez Rankin, who was out of Mississippi State.
That was the third-round pick for Houston.
Who was their third-rounder last year. They're grade-wise, not even close. Night and day. Little all day long in terms of how he graded out.
Little's not the best run blocker. He does slip off a ton of blocks, graded in the 60s and 70s. But again, we're focusing on the more valuable component here.
Big hands, long arms, athletic, and
developing
produced
pass blocking. All right, let's wrap it up with your favorite player, Jerry Tillery from Notre Dame. Why is he on our most underrated?
So pretty much everyone was fringe first rounder in terms of I don't think anyone's. Maybe I've seen Elkton Jenkins and Greg Little in first-round mocks. Pretty much all those other guys have not necessarily seen. This one, Jerry Taylor, is pretty much in every first-round mock, but I haven't seen him higher than maybe 20-something. I haven't seen him earlier than the 20s, which we find him as a top 10 player. So that's why we're saying he's underrated. He comes back to my haggling over athleticism take in terms of he's a very good athlete. I mean, his change of direction numbers were very good for the position. His 10 split was extremely good for the position. 1.69 split, 7.45 cone, 4.33 shuttle, all excellent numbers for that position. 4.93 40. I mean, he is an elite athlete. You can haggle over levels of elite athleticism. He is an elite athlete, though, for the position, elite production. I mean, he's a top 10 player on our board. And so if you're drafting him anywhere outside of the top 10, we're basically saying you're going to steal.
Again, these guys are going to be written up after the draft as some of our favorite picks, unless Arcega-Whiteside goes like 8th or something like that, and Winovich goes 12th.
And then we'll say, hey, they got it right.
Guys as we'll say we nailed it. But these are guys that are probably going to be written up as some of our favorite picks of the draft. It's your most underrated guys that we think have first-round talent that maybe aren't getting enough hype.